This is Beyond with Heather Tesch, where we examine near-death experiences and life itself, hopefully making this life a little better. Hello, everyone. I am so glad you are joining us again today. And once again, my guest is Sky Waterpeace. Hello, Sky.
Hey, Heather.
It is great to have you here again. In the last episode, you shared your two near-death experiences, one from alcohol poisoning, and the other one, you were hit by a car in a terrible accident. And folks can go back and listen to those. I'll have a link in the description. But I want to dig in now with a lot of questions. So hopefully those of you that just tuned in will stick around for this. One thing I found really interesting in your near-death experience that I haven't always heard in others is the fact that you were in 3 places at once.
Mm-hmm.
So how does that shatter? You were this militant atheist, and, what just was it like experiencing something like that? And I assume it felt very real.
Yeah, it's a great question, Heather. Thank you. And thank you for having me.
You're welcome.
The experience of having 3 separate perceptions of my own consciousness, or 3 different streams of consciousness simultaneously, was very, very, very moving to me, and in some sense shocking to me, because it had never occurred to me. And it messed with this perspective, because as a militant atheist, I had this worldview that everything is physics, everything has an explanation, everything has a basis in this thing called physical matter reality. And there's a big assumption behind that, like, okay, so where'd physical matter reality come from? It's like, well, it just is, it's just like this, where we're not answering that question, and it was based on this notion that, if everything could be explained by science, I had this notion that the only way I could perceive something was if, input was coming into my eyeballs and into my ears and into my skin and things like that, and that was the only way to have an awareness of a situation. But it was very much like an intellectual arrogance kind of thing. Like, I'm smart and I figured it out, and I know, it's all physics, and these people are stupid because they made up this thing called God, and, stuff like that. It was very much this arrogance and this sort of like trying to cling to power of my own, self or whatever. And the thing about this 3 perspectives, which if you listen to the first session that we did, in this car accident, my perspective was split into 3 completely separate perspectives. One in which I'm standing here talking to this man. One in which I'm in my body flying through the air, and one in which it's like a camera in the corner of the scene watching the entire thing. And it's like maybe 2 of those I could account for, right? Like I can account for, if I'm in my body flying through the air, okay, I can imagine that because I'm in my body all the time, right? If I'm in my body standing talking to a person, I can account for that too. I wasn't, right, but in the in the context of brain damage or something from getting hit by a car, it's sort of like, all right, I can imagine that. But to have both of those happening, and even the third one, even seeing myself, because that's something I can imagine from a dream, right? Like seeing a scene in which I'm in the scene is not that, I've seen myself on video or whatever, it's not that strange to imagine. But having all 3 of them happening simultaneously and being aware of all 3 of them, so it's not easy for me to describe it, except for that I remember it, right? It's like it was perfectly normal. I mean, it's like I'm a human being that has 2 hands, right? And I'm not weirded out by the fact that I can be feeling one thing with one hand and something else with my other hand. It's like, this hand is on the cold surface of the table, and this hand is holding a cup of coffee, and they're just 2 input streams, and I'm perfectly happy to incorporate both of them, and I'm used to it. I have practice with it, right? But I had no experience whatsoever with this 3 streams of awareness coming at me. But it made perfect sense. It was perfectly integrated. As though it were normal, right? as though it were normal. And so it begs the question, do I have practice in being like that? Do I have practice in multiple awareness, if you want to call it that, or more, to use a more general term, expanded awareness? Do I have actual experience with my consciousness not being limited to the perspective, to a singular perspective oriented around this physical human body? And you know, it seems like probably yes, probably. And of course, I now, you know, this conversation is motivated by, you know, a half a decade of intense meditation and things like that, you know, and everything else on top of all the stuff that led up to me having an opening in my awareness to begin with. And now I would say that, yeah, like the unusual part is not the multiple perspectives, or like I said, the expanded perspective. The unusual part is really the constricted perspective. You know, it's actually not, I'm used to it. The physical human sky waterpiece is used to peering out of these eyeballs and feeling with these skin cells and all the physicality of my human body. But that's the unusual experience, because my consciousness is actually much larger than that. My consciousness is actually much more expansive than that. And in order to experience life as a human being, I have to actually take this massive amount of expansive awareness and funnel it down into this teeny tiny little package. And there's value to that. I mean, there's a reason for that, I think, because it's almost like a microscope, right? Like when you look through a microscope, you're looking at just the teeniest, tiniest little slice of something, right? So you've constricted your awareness from all the things you could be looking at to this one thing, but you're looking at it in intense detail that you wouldn't be able to see otherwise. And so I think that's the idea of this human experience, is like I'm living this physical earth system as a human being. Like I'm right up in there. Like I'm like a probe. I've been sent in, and I'm walking around, and I'm experiencing the eating and the, you know, pooping and all the things that we do as humans, you know. And so I'm gathering all this data from this perspective, and I have to do it like this because the probe can only handle so much, right? But the actual intelligence behind the probe, you know, the colony or the consciousness that sent the probe into the world is much, much more vast. Just like if we send a Mars rover, gathers little bits of data about Mars, but the human scientist, you know, the collection of all scientists in the world that are going to look at that data is a much more intelligent system and has much more awareness than just that little Mars probe with its little, you know, its sensors. Not that I'm knocking the Mars probe; it's very advanced for technology these days and everything. But so does that sort of start to answer your question? I'm not sure.
Yes. Actually, that's really interesting how you answered it. What about love? When you were in these expanded areas of consciousness, did you sense a stronger love than you do here on Earth?
I sometimes tell people like the name of my God is love. I have it tattooed on my arm. You know, that is, you know, if I had to use a single word to describe, you know, the ultimate nature of things, it would probably be love. I think of love, and I've gotten a lot of this like through meditation, as being the connection between all things, kind of like the Holy Spirit in the Trinity. It is the thing which connects all the things together, and so I would say that in that space, there is, in some sense, like only love, because you're so, you like, I'll speak for myself. I was in retrospect, now that I've been able to parse this again, a lot of this I wasn't aware of at the time. I just felt like in my second experience, especially, the sense of peace and this sense that I in the earlier session I described how, you know, that was the real convincing thing for me about the second experience, was that I recognized that sense. And it was a sense that I didn't remember that I could recognize And it was this sense of like overwhelming peace. And I think that love is a good way to describe it, in the sense that it was peace because of the connection, because of this expansive connection. Like, I'm no longer separate from all things. Like, as a human body, my human body, it seems to be separate from all things. Even in the physical sense, it's not. I mean, it's like I'm breathing air that was breathed by every other human on the planet. You know what I mean? Like, they say that like every lungful of air you breathe has oxygen in it that was breathed by like anybody else that's ever lived, Jesus or Gandhi or Hitler or anybody. It's like we're all actually exchanging chemicals constantly all the time. So even in the sense that I want to think of my body as separate, it's not really as separate as I think it is. And you have to think about the ecosystem and the planet as an organism, the planet as a consciousness and all that. But aside from all that, normally we walk around as though I am this thing. I identify so strongly with my body, with this probe that I'm in, that I start to feel like this is who I am. I am the probe, and I am walking around, and I am separate from you because we're not the same probe, clearly, right? And again, taking aside the fact that we breathe the same air, we drink the same water, etc. But it's this kind of it's an assumption. See, that's the key part about it. It's not the truth. It's just a perspective. And when I take that perspective and I say this is the truth, and I act like it's the truth, it becomes my worldview. But it's still just a perspective. It was never any more true just because I'm acting like it's true, right? It's still just a perspective. And so being in that, quote unquote, other place, or being dead, if you want to call it that, or having this awareness, in the question of love, again, because love is this sort of like, what does it mean? To me, it means connection. And so to me, it means that stripped of my body, my consciousness separated from my body, or I should say no longer identified with my body as its source and all, fullness, then I can have this expansive awareness. And like I described before, the black tunnel, it's not black, it's full of information. If I had the wherewithal to have explored the information in that black tunnel, I have no doubt that there was, lots and lots of connections to be found in that space. I mean, I had that sense, right? That sense of fullness, that sense of like, very powerful. It's like when you suddenly walk into a very hot, steamy room, like a sauna or something like that. And there's just this feeling of just very, very overwhelming sense. It's like that, but instead of it being like almost an oppressive feeling, it's the opposite. It's like if you could walk into where there's this powerful sense, but it's an expansive sense. It's a connective sense. It's like a suddenly you can breathe and see and experience like you never have before sense. So yes, there was in that sense more love. I think that I'm struggling with answering the question because, or maybe it's a challenge for me because there's such a connotation with the word love of a much smaller version. And I'm not knocking love. Like, I'm deeply in love with my wife, my human wife, but so many aspects of love are reduced to this feeling of an ecstatic type of feeling, right? Which is modulated by chemicals in my brain and things like that. And that all of this is just pointing to something. And that something is what love really is, which is this connection that is shared, not because I feel it, right? Not because I have a fuzzy feeling for somebody, but because there is in a very real sense, we're coming from the same place. We're being in the same place. We're doing this shared experience of this human experiment, or whatever you want to call it. And we might be doing it from vastly different places. And when I have that perspective, when I recall that perspective, I'm able to look at I won't name any names, but certain, for example, world leaders that have a platform that I thoroughly disagree with, that I would consider evil. For example, Hitler, for example, or something. These people that are just awful, and I just disagree with everything that they represent, or whatever like that. Like, okay, but that is a person who's a human being. They were born, they had experiences as children, they were ashamed of things, they were embarrassed, they felt an overwhelming sense of this love connection to another person in certain romantic contexts, and they lacked it in other contexts, and they had all these experiences of being a human being, like I have, just like I have. And they made choices about, I'm going to do it like this, I'm going to do it like that. And I made different choices, like I'm not going to do that, or I am going to do this and everything. But those are all very superficial compared to this deep underlying connection. And with the experiences I have now, I would say that, everybody comes to this planet with a purpose, and that purpose doesn't have to be a planned in advance. Like, it doesn't have, I'm going to come and I'm going to do this, and I'm going to, solve this problem, and I'm going to, preach to the people, or whatever. It doesn't have to be laid out like that. I mean, any more than you go to a carnival. Some people go to the carnival. Oh, I've got to go on this ride, right? I'm going to do that, and I'm going to do this, and we're going to buy the candy apples. And then, or some people just go to the carnival like, well, just see what's going to happen, And some people, their purpose was to just show up and just, have another ride and see what happens. And some people show up and their purpose was to experience deep pain. And some people, their purpose was to experience, this. And it's like, because we're all probes, and we're all probing for these different experiences. And it's like, how can I, if who I am is not a human body, but who I am is this greater sense of consciousness, right? This much more expanded sense of consciousness. But I've chosen to come in as a human this time to experience certain things. But it's like, how can I experience all that there is to be a human as one person? It's like, I can't. I would have to, it'd be darn near impossible. So what I do is I come in as this person, I come in as that person, I come in as you, I come in as this baby, I come in as this person in another country, and then we all, it's like if I'm trying to gauge the temperature of my tea, and I stick my finger in it to test if it's real hot yet, if it is it cooled off a little bit. I stick my finger in. My finger is not who I am, right? My finger is not the whole being. It's just I'm just sending in a probe to gather some information, and that information gets integrated by the whole being. And then I stick a different finger in over here, and I touch this thing, and I gather these different sort of senses, but all of them are coming to this greater sense of consciousness. So to answer your question shortly, was there more love? Yes.
To sum all that up, yes.
Yeah, exactly. Somebody once said, don't ask him a question unless you really want to know the answer.
You were talking about, we all come into this life, this world, to experience different things. And I read a lot in the comments that people will say, well, I can't believe in a God that would allow such and such, and they name some terrible thing. What are your thoughts on that?
I think that is, it's an understandable perspective. How could a God allow, a person to be hurt, for example, just in the general sense of any kind? And it's like, all right, well, if you parse that, what would happen if a human being, suppose my life were exactly like it is, right? But I never experienced any sort of pain whatsoever at all. I mean, I'm physically not capable of experiencing pain. Well, there would be all sorts of problems then, right? Because I could, for example, I could damage my organism because I have no sensory capability of understanding that I'm putting it in danger, right? So immediately the idea of like a pain-free world starts to run up against problems. It's like, like I want to have sensors that alert me if the skin of the body is being, attacked, so that I can stop it, right? So I can protect it from those kind of things. So pain is not inherently a bad thing. Pain is a message, and that message is about something. And the problem is that it's like in the Buddhist perspective, existence is suffering, and the origin of suffering is desire. And it's like, it's hard for often to wrap your head around that, but it's very true. It's like if I stub my toe, that could be among the worst pain I experience as a human being. I mean, it could just be horribly painful, right? But the problem is not the pain. The problem is that I want it to not hurt, which is subtle but different, right? I want it to not hurt. My desire for it to not be the way it is what makes it suffering. Otherwise, it's just pain.
And yet the example that they often give is that a child is suffering, what they see as an innocent child.
Yeah. Bob Monroe in his books described a meditation in which he asked to see different lives that he had lived as a human. And he had this like flash, sense of all these different lives, including a life where he was a baby and he died as a baby, and that stuck with me, that image, because it's like a classic. It's like, well, why bring this baby into the world just to suffer and die? But from his perspective, he had it as, that is part of the experience. It's like, why does anyone watch a movie where anyone suffers in a movie? I mean, it's like, if you think about it, it's like, well, why would you do that? Why on earth would a human being watch a movie where someone is sad and in pain? Like, why would I want that? Why would I want to have another person, but it's like, because it's part of the experience. And we're gathering this information, we're gathering this intel. And the idea is like, from the perspective of, Sky Waterpeace, 40-something-year-old human male who says, that child is 5 years old and is suffering and is innocent and doesn't deserve that. But from the perspective of the consciousness that launched that child into existence, knowing it was going to go into a world like that, knowing perhaps even having planned with whatever consciousness plans these things, what I want this time is I need to learn, I've had all these blessed lives. I've had this life where I've been like this and I've been like this, and I want to learn what it's like to experience lack. How will I know if I don't experience it? And design a life where I'm going to go in and I'm going to experience lack, I'm going to experience pain or whatever. And so it's like, it's really, it's disempowering to think of children as being like, we call them innocent, right? They're innocent, but it's like, it in some sense it's very disempowering. It's like, who am I to say that because this person has only been a human for 5 years, that they're less than in terms of human experience than I am, right? Because maybe that person has come from, maybe it's their 57th incarnation as a human, and they're actually more in touch with all that collective consciousness than I am, which they often say, like, human children are tend to have more easily expressed, for example, psi abilities and psychic abilities, because they haven't been taught by society to not have them. They're still in some sense closer to their true nature than we are. So it's sort of like, it's this assumption, like, okay, well, an innocent child is suffering, that is taking that the consciousness that animates that person, and it's taking it and filtering it through my consciousness. So it's really in this, it might not sound nice to say, but it's a very egocentric way of thinking about it. It's and I can identify this because I used to think like this, right? So I used to think very egocentrically about everything, but it really is. It's really saying, I don't think that I would want to be having that experience, and therefore it's wrong for anyone to have that experience. And if you take that concept away from this specific example, I don't think I would want to have that experience, so therefore it's wrong for anyone to have that experience. That is like the basis of all prejudice, right? It's like, I don't like this thing, so therefore nobody should like this thing, right? Well, maybe, right? Maybe if it's a truly universally evil thing or something like that, then maybe. But maybe it's just something that somewhere along the line someone taught me I shouldn't like. And so I grew up saying this is something I shouldn't like. And so nobody should like this thing. And really, actually, I'm just prejudiced. I'm prejudiced against people, or I'm prejudiced against, certain experiences or things like that. So, so getting to the, what kind of God would cause a child to suffer? Flip that around. Actually ask that question. Don't make it a rhetorical question. What kind of God will? Well, imagine a God who's, imagine a universe of consciousness that's infinitely loving and infinitely giving. That says we're gonna carve off a piece of myself, the infinite consciousness, and we're going to allow it to experience its own little bundle of consciousness separate from the rest, so that it can have a different perspective. You can have the perspective, just like going on the carnival. It's like you go on the ride because it's a different perspective than when you're on the ground, not spinning around or whatever. So we peel off part of ourself to be this, this sort of cluster of consciousness. And look, cluster, you can do anything at all. You have absolute freedom. If you want to experience suffering, experience suffering. You want to experience glory, experience glory. You want to experience it. See, the thing is, when I think of all of reality as being just my perspective in this human body, then a lot of stuff doesn't make sense, right? It's like, well, why would it be like this? But if I think of it like this is one probe of many, then all of a sudden it makes a lot more sense. It's like, okay, I can experience this. We come in with different characteristics, with different life, different stuff to learn from. It's like working out in the gym, right? You don't go to the gym to lift things that are light and easy to lift, right? That's not why you go there. You go to the gym to do something that's actually challenging. And the more challenging it is, the more you get out of it. You make a deliberate effort to go into a situation that's an unusual situation from your normal, to do something that's very challenging in order to what? To grow yourself physically. Well, it's just like that with life. I go into a challenging life in order to grow myself spiritually, in order to rack up all kinds of, you can call it karma, or you can call it good vibes, or you can call it whatever, but to bring back this experience of how to handle that situation, including how to mess it up, right? You're not lifting, sometimes you lift too hard and you tear something or whatever. I mean, there's all sorts of ways of having this experience.
At IONS, when I was listening to your talk, you said that if we could see the energy that flowed between each one of us, we would be astonished. Yeah. So what do you mean by that, and how do you know? So that question that I just asked is where we're going to start in part 3. And I did decide to break this into 3 parts because Sky and I were just having such a great conversation, and he just had a lot to share, and I didn't want to miss out on any of it. So let me know what your thoughts are. I'd love to hear your comments. And then also, if you've made it this far, please go ahead and just type in "made it" in the comments. I always appreciate it when you stick with me to the end. So thanks, everybody. I hope you come back for part 3. Thanks for joining me on Beyond with Heather Tesch. Please add comments and questions you'd like future guests to answer. Also, if you liked what you heard, please hit the thumbs up button and subscribe. That'll help keep this podcast going. You can also go to Beyond with Heather Tesch to look for more episodes.